So after my last reread of The Shining, which is one of my favorite novels, it's most definitely a classic for a reason, I got to thinking about the comparisons between the novel The Shining and the Stanley Kubrick film, which is also a classic. Stephen King notoriously dislikes that movie. And there's a good reason why. There are a lot of changes between characters and themes. So I'm going to cover some of those differences. In the novel, Jack is a recovering alcoholic. At the beginning of the novel, he has gone about 15 months sober. This was after breaking Danny's arm in a raging fit after Danny spilled Jack's beer all over some papers he was working on. He also lost his teaching job after severely beating a student. So this is a guy who has a lot of problems and is a total Jekyll and Hyde when he drinks. If you've ever met a guy like that, you'll know what I mean. Jack doesn't have much hope at all of landing another teaching gig and turns to his writing, which is coming along really slowly due to the stresses of no income and having a young family. The caretaker job at the Overlook Hotel is his last best hope for redemption, to prove to his wife Wendy that he can support her and their son, and he will have seclusion and security he needs to finish the play he's been working on. Jack's interview at the Overlook goes terrible. Stuart Ullman, the head manager of the hotel, flat out tells Jack there is no way anyone with his history can be trusted to take care of such a fine resort as the Overlook. Completely lays out the basket of dirty laundry that is Jack Torrance's adult life. Unfortunately for Mr. Ullman, Jack was big friends with Al Shockley, a man on the board of directors for the hotel, and had already hired him. However, in the movie, Ullman can't say enough nice things about Jack and says he came with glowing recommendations, which completely destroys Jack's character and motivation. This is a desperate man. If he had glowing recommendations for this job, why not any other? Jack takes the job seriously, does the maintenance work Ullman wants done, and works on his play, until he finds a scrapbook and stacks of old papers in the cellar, completely spelling out the not-so-glamorous past of the Overlook. Jack is enthralled. Stories of death, gambling rings, how many times the hotel has switched hands due to various issues, all seeming to center around a man named Horace Derwent. Jack, armed with knowledge of the Overlook's past, calls Stuart Ullman and lays out the dirty laundry in the same petty game of gotcha, because he was still upset about how Ullman had laid out his dirty laundry during the interview, and threatens Ullman with writing a book about the Overlook's bloody history. He immediately regrets it. Al, the man who hired Jack, calls him and almost threatens to fire him and pleads that he not go ahead with the book. Jack sheepishly agrees, knowing he needs this job. Further understanding he has anger issues that he needs to keep under control. Jack spends more and more time with the hotel papers, and the old habits from when he was drinking start coming back, rubbing his mouth, chewing aspirin, and soon he has completely abandoned his play and looks at it with nothing but disdain. The story of the Overlook is his new project, whether the hotel directors like it or not. In the movie, he doesn't find a scrapbook, doesn't learn the Overlook's history. The only indication that he's not working on his play anymore is when he writes page after page after page of all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. That's fine. It gets the point across in the movie context, I suppose. I still like the context that the hotel was getting into his brain by appealing to his academic sensibilities. Jack is haunted by his abusive father, who routinely beat his mother, and the hotel used that against him, using Jack's father's voice to bait him into smashing the CB radio, their only means of communication with the outside world. In the movie, Jack takes a couple components out of the radio in an odd and uninspired scene. After the woman in 217 attempts to strangle Danny, Wendy is convinced Jack did it. Who else would it have been? No one else could possibly be in the hotel, and Jack does have a history of abuse that she will never let him forget. This is when Jack has his first meeting with Lloyd the bartender, who pours him 20 martinis to make up for all that lost time being on the wagon. He didn't actually get drunk at this encounter. The ghosts in the hotel still aren't strong enough yet. Soon, Danny explains that it was a woman who strangled him. It was her! Jack, knowing Wendy wouldn't have done such a thing, can't help himself. He finds delight with the shoe being on the other foot, and they conclude there must be someone else in the hotel. When Jack went to explore 217, which was changed to 237 in the movie, he didn't see anything in the room until he was leaving and saw that there was a woman sitting in the bathtub, and convinces himself he was just hallucinating and there was nothing there. In the movie, Jack finds a pretty naked woman, makes out with her, and then she turns into an old rotting hag. I think this is what people are talking about when they say the Overlook was appealing to Jack sexually. Nope, that was just a movie trying to sell tickets. Jack also had an incident earlier with the topiary animals, not a hedge maze, more on that later, that he also chose to ignore. Even though Danny was seeing the same things, Jack convinces himself and Wendy that maybe, just maybe, this is something that Danny did to himself. You know, those weird trances he goes into? Either way, Wendy isn't taking any chances, keeping a big knife on her and telling Jack they need to leave as soon as they can safely do so. They make a plan to use the snowmobile to head down to Sidewinder, the closest town. Jack goes out to make sure the thing works, and what possession the hotel has of him at this point makes him destroy it. Of course, he reports back that the snowmobile is toasted. Someone destroyed it. Jack finds himself venturing into a ghost party. Things are a little bit more lively at this point. They are feeding off some kind of energy. They booze Jack up and tell him he is the caretaker. He has always been the caretaker, and management is very interested in him. He is of top managerial timber. But there is something he must do for them. He must kill his family, in particular Danny. He's the one they really want. Jack is convinced the hotel wants him. They are playing completely into his ego, but their actual goal is Danny. Jack ends up falling behind the bar because he's completely drunk at this point, and Wendy heads down to investigate. Jack takes the opportunity to try to kill her, but she is able to subdue him with one of the booze bottles. Where did that come from, she must be thinking, and knocks him out. Her and Danny drag his body into the pantry and lock it, knowing he has all the food he could ever need, and they'll just have to hope a park ranger comes sometime soon. Danny explains that it's the hotel making Jack do the bad things. Jack spends hours in the pantry, and soon, someone is at the door. Delbert Grady, a previous caretaker who killed his family, the father of the Grady sisters, who are so infamous in the movie but barely get a mention in the novel. He berates Jack, telling him he's clearly not a managerial timber if he got himself locked in a pantry. Wendy is far stronger than the Overlook anticipated. More on that later. Grady eventually lets Jack out, leaving him a giant roque mallet to bludgeon Wendy and Danny to death with. And of course, that was an axe in the movie. Meanwhile, Wendy has a bad feeling, and before she heads off to bed, wants to double check that Jack is still locked up. Of course he's not, and when she heads down, he beats her, smashes the mallet into her stomach, knocking the wind out of her, hitting her in the back, breaking a vertebrae, but she's able to fight back and sticks the knife in him. After this, Wendy manages to head to their apartment in the hotel to find Danny, who has already gotten up and fled. Jack follows her and starts beating down the door with the mallet, and in comes the "Here's Johnny" part, which is a line Jack Nicholson ad-libbed in the movie, which was never actually in the novel. Then Jack hears a vehicle approaching the hotel and goes to investigate. That instead of finishing Wendy off. Jack subdues the mysterious visitor, who is Dick Halloran, who Danny called with his shining ability, and then heads out in search of Danny. Danny, meanwhile, has talked to Tony, who the hotel is trying to prevent from talking to him. but lets him know Jack has forgotten something very important, and Danny will remember it. Jack finds Danny, and it looks like it's all about to end. Then the real Jack regains control and tells Danny to run. Danny doesn't listen and tells his dad that the boiler was never dumped that day. Both Jack and the hotel forgot, and Jack has to run to dump it before the boiler explodes. The movie, you don't really get any of Jack's real motivations. You see Jack as simply a guy who just happens to be a little bit batty and probably should never have been in seclusion. The movie also has a bit of an identity crisis, and it plays itself off as a psychological horror movie. And then speckles in some supernatural elements from the novel, and it really makes it feel out of place. Winifred Wendy Torrance. This is a total contrast and actually kills the movie for me. I can understand some of the changes in Jack's character. Some of the exposition in his character arc may not play well in a 90-minute movie like it does on the page. Wendy, though, she's easily the strongest character in the novel. She has held her family together and has continually put Jack in his place, and has never shied away from putting Danny first and letting Jack know she's ready to leave him if he doesn't get his act together. Not to mention, physically, Wendy Torrance is described as gorgeous. A woman who makes heads turn. In the movie, she's Shelley Duvall. Kubrick chose to make Wendy Torrance nothing but sheepish, making the line from Grady, "She's much stronger than we anticipated," not hold any water. Daniel Anthony Torrance. If there's a titular character, it's Danny Torrance. He is special. He has a gift Dick Halloran calls the shining, a gift he also possesses. There are many people that shine. Most don't know it, but Danny shines brighter than anyone Dick has ever come across. He has an uncanny psychic ability, can read minds, knows where things are, and even has an imaginary friend who appears to him named Tony. And that shows him things. The novel starts off with Tony showing Danny the Overlook. A vision of a monster banging down a hallway saying, "Take your medicine," which is what Jack ends up screaming to Danny in something called red rum. After asking his parents and the doctors repeatedly what red rum is, he has another vision where he sees it's the word murder transposed in a mirror. When the Torrances first arrive at the Overlook, Dick Halloran takes Danny aside and explains to him what the Shining is, and tells him this hotel is not a good place for a person with the Shining. The Overlook has a long, bloody history, and someone that shines can see those things, but also tells him everything he sees is just like pictures in a book, and they can't hurt him. Dick warns him to stay out of 217, though. There is a woman rotting in the bathtub in that room who someone that shines will see. Dick tells Danny that if they get into any trouble, don't hesitate to use his shining ability to call him, which he ends up doing. Dick was convinced the apparitions anyone who shines sees in the hotel will not hurt him. However, with someone as powerful as Danny, the ghosts were able to feed on it and grow stronger and stronger. The hotel used Jack to try to kill Danny so he could completely absorb the shine and become alive. This was completely lost in the movie. You never really got that the ghosts in the hotel had any motivation whatsoever, besides just being spooks. Other differences, there was never a hedge maze in the novel. The hedges were a group of topiary animals that chased Jack at one point, Danny at another point, and tear up Dick Halloran pretty good when he comes back to the hotel. Dick Halloran is not killed by Jack when he arrives back at the hotel. First, he is attacked by the hedge animals, manages to douse them in gasoline and catch them on fire, then enters the hotel and gets severely beaten by Jack, but manages to get Danny and Wendy to safety before the hotel blows up. Oh yeah, the hotel blows up. The movie ends in ice, the novel ends in fire. Why did the hotel have such a defective boiler, by the way? Stuart Allman, a vicious little prick. I hope you've enjoyed this video of The Shining novel versus The Shining movie. Stephen King versus Stanley Kubrick, can't go wrong with that, right? If you like this content, please like and subscribe and share with all your friends. Thank you.